Welcome to the Connor's Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I was browsing through Turner Classic Movies, and there was a movie on Blackboard Jungle. And I was very surprised to see that one of the young actors in the movie, who's a lot more recognizable a few years later, was there. Our next guest, Jamie Farr. How you doing today?
I am doing great, and I'm so delighted that you brought that up because I have two stories to tell you about that. One took place when I was in New York City, and I was at the Martin Beck Theater. I was playing Nathan Detroit in Guys and Dolls, and my wife came to visit, and we went in. At that time, Blockbuster was around, and we walked into Blockbuster, and I was looking for Blackboard Jungle, which I did in 1954, I believe, under my birth name, which is Jamil Farah. And I hadn't changed it to Jamie Farr yet. And the man said, "Oh, yes, Mr. Farr." He says, "You're in the nostalgia section." So that was 20-some years ago. I was in nostalgia. Then this past Sunday, I'm watching TCM, and Blackboard Jungle is on it. And Ben Mankiewicz, at the end of the show, said, "Hey, you know, there are students that were in this classroom beside, of course, Sidney Poitier, which everybody knew and became a huge star. But he said there was also Vic Morrow, who later went on and did some big movies and, of course, was well known for Combat. And then he said Paul Mazursky, who was in it, and he later went on to become a writer and created, I think, The Monkees on television with his writing partner, Larry Tucker, and then, of course, went on to do feature films. And then he mentioned me and as part of that group that later went on to, as he said, came on to MASH for one day and stayed for the full 11 years that the series was on. But there's someone else he didn't mention that was in the back of the classroom, and his name is John Erman. And John Erman became a big director. He directed some major films and was also one of the directors of the hit miniseries Roots. So I remember getting a letter from Richard Brooks, who was the director and wrote the screenplay for that, and said, "We had one heck of a class." James Drury was in that also.
Oh, really?
He later went on to become the Virginian. Yeah. So that was a pretty good class.
How'd you get that part?
I was doing a play at the Pasadena Playhouse where I had attended. Had gone to school there, and I was doing a play, I think it was called Bernadine by Mary Chase. And I was playing a character, a teenager in it. And one of the talent scouts from MGM, he was in the audience, saw me, and I remember his name, Al Trisconi. And I didn't even have an agent at the time. And he said, I came backstage, he said, "Listen, we're doing a movie over at MGM now. It's called Blackboard Jungle. It's from a book written by Van Hunter. And I think you'd be right for one of the parts, and we're screen testing." And he said, "Would you be interested?" I said, "Oh, my gosh, are you kidding? MGM, that was my favorite studio growing up. I used to go to the Lowe's Valentine Theater in Toledo, Ohio, and watch every MGM movie that ever came out. That was my favorite studio." And I said, "But I don't have an agent." And he says, "I'll get you an agent." He said, "We'll get an agent for you." He's the brother of Samuel Marks, who was a big producer at MGM, discovered Elizabeth Taylor and did National Velvet and a lot of big movies. His name was Burt Marks. And he said, "Mr. Marks will represent you, and if you get the part, he will then negotiate." So I said, "Oh, great." So there I was. I had my little Model A Ford. I drove up to the MGM lot there, parked right across from the Irving Thalberg building, and got ushered in. Joel Freeman was there. Joel Freeman just passed away. Joel was Dory Sherry's nephew. Dory Sherry at that time was running MGM Studios, and he was an assistant director. Joel later became a producer and did movies like Shaft and a few of the other things. But Joel was there as the assistant, and you saw these kids coming in. Some of them had switchblade knives and brass knuckles and that. And I said, "Holy Toledo, what kind of a part?" He says, "No, those are the extras that you're seeing for the secondary roles." He says, "Your role is over here as a part of Santini, and you're going to screen test with an actor by the name of James Drury. He's going to be playing the Glenn Ford role of Mr. Dadier." So he gave me a pair of glasses, and they gave me some wardrobe in that, and I did the screen test. And lo and behold, here's my first time out, and I got the part. And I was so excited to be on that lot. Here I am, a kid, back in Toledo watching the MGM movies, with Gene Kelly and Spencer Tracy and Clark Gable and Fred Astaire. And now I'm on the lot, and I'm going to the commissary having lunch with all those people. I tell you, a whole bunch of those kids were running around that lot going to every sound stage we could find to see what movies they were shooting. It was so exciting.
Let me ask you, a lot of the younger people out there may not remember Glenn Ford, who was a big star at the time.
Yes.
What was it like working with Glenn Ford?
Oh, Glenn was wonderful. He was very easy to work with. He was also one of my favorites, too. I had a couple of favorites in my lifetime, and I got the good fortune of not only working with them but becoming friends with them. Glenn Ford was one of them. William Holden was another person. I did his miniseries, Blue Night, together. And my favorite comedian, who I listened to on radio and then watched him all the time in television, and also saw all of his movies at MGM, was Red Skelton. And Red became my mentor in my lifetime, but I did have the good fortune of knowing Glenn very, very well. As a matter of fact, I was in attendance at his funeral with some of the other people that had worked with him, and we had an evening where he could not attend. This was when Glenn was quite ill, and they showed the movie Gilda, which made him the star. That's the movie that he did with Rita Hayworth at Columbia. And there was Anne Francis got up and said something, Debbie Reynolds, I did, I think Terry Moore. I'm mentioning some names that probably some of your listeners may not know, but they were certainly big stars. Of course, Debbie will always be a big star. And that we did that evening there at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood, and I did attend Glenn's funeral. He was a wonderful actor and a terrific guy, and so was William Holden. William was just terrific, and they did a movie together. I think it was called either Arizona or Texas. It was one of those Western features, and here I get a chance to work with them. And, of course, working with Red Skelton, who was my childhood hero, and becoming almost like a son to him, a second son to him, was very, very exciting for me.
Yeah, again, that's another name for the past, but, guys my age, everybody was...
Guys my age have nothing but the past, Mike.
Right.
What are you talking about?
But, Red Skelton is just a tremendous name. The Pledge of Allegiance, even now, I think people play it. But that was such a great show, and the guests that were on that show, it was always fun.
The guests on the Red Skelton show, I worked with Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre, Jade Mansfield, Errol Flynn, George Raft, Vincent Price. I'm trying to go. Red had all the biggest names, also the young ones at that time, who may not be popular names today, but Bobby Rydell, Fabian. There was that whole gang, Frankie Avalon. There was all part of that history, that genre that occurred, and Red had all the biggest names on that show, and he was absolutely wonderful to work with. So much fun. As I said, he was like a father to me. When I was in the real, I had done his show originally live on TV, and I carried half the show, and they were bringing me back several times, and I got drafted into the real army and had to serve overseas. And I was in Japan and Korea, and when Red's son Richard, he was about 12 years old, passed away from leukemia, Red wanted to go to the Orient and entertain the troops. So he requested me. We were in touch with one another, and he requested me from the State Department. I was merely a private, and I got VIP status on a United Nations airplane out of Tachikawa, Japan, which is the air base that was there. We flew into Kimpo Air Base, and I went with Red in my private uniform with VIP status all the way up to the demarcation zone, entertaining small pockets of GIs all over the place. As a matter of fact, we even went through a MASH unit. Little did I know, that I would wind up in a show that was all about MASH. And I have some of those black and white photographs that was done. And then when Red was departing and I had to go back to my unit, he said, when you get out of the service, you come and see me because times will be hard for you getting back into show business. And I thought, gee, what a nice thing for him to say, and I really didn't take it to heart. But sure enough, I got out, and I tried to resurrect my career, and things weren't happening, and my dad passed away, and we didn't have any money. I was going to have to go home and help support my mom. So I went over to CBS to say goodbye to him, and he refused to let me go. He said, "No, you're not." He said, "You're a doctor of comedy," and he said, "I'm putting you under personal contract right now." He reached into his pocket, pulled out several $100 bills. He said, "Send that home to your mother, and from now on, you're working for me. I'll see you up at the house up in Bel Air tomorrow morning." So I wound up with being with Red for a whole full year, doing his show, traveling with him to the Sands in Las Vegas, the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach, the Chez Paris in Chicago, the Moulin Rouge in L.A. What a wonderful lesson to learn from such a great master, and I to this day thank him. And I became one of the pallbearers for his funeral. It was Bob Hope, Milton Berle, me, and a stage manager that he knew and liked very, very much for years at CBS, a man who passed away a few years ago, Willie Dahl. And we were the four pallbearers for Red. He's buried at Glendale and at Forest Lawn, where Jack Benny and George Burns are.
That's a pretty good cast there. Now, we're talking to Jamie Farr, Corporal Klinger, on Ask the Lawyer with me, Mike Connors. Of course, MASH is what everybody remembers you for. How did that come about?
Well, of course, yes. And it's still on. I mean, it's on in more stations now than I can ever remember. It must be on about 6 or 7 cable stations: Sundance, AMC, MeTV, WGN. I've probably forgotten, a few of them. But yeah, it's a never-ending show. And I remember Larry Gelbart, who created my character and who developed the series for television. And I think the third year said that we were going to become the next I Love Lucy, and he certainly was right with his prediction, because it's on all over the place.
It must have been a little different from you because you actually were in Korea. I mean, not during the war, but nonetheless. How did you feel the authenticity of the filming and?
Everything was as accurate as could be, except the smell. They used the honey buckets, which there was human feces that they used for fertilizer in the fields. But that where we shot there up in Malibu Canyon for the exteriors had all of the same bearings, the topography and everything that Korea had, as I said, with the exception of a smell. And, of course, with my nose, I probably could have smelled it there from all the way from Korea, But, yeah, it was the authenticity was just fabulous. And the MASH units, as I said, I went through them, and the replication of that was remarkable. Gene Reynolds and Larry Gelbart and Burt Metcalf did a superb job of bringing the authenticity to the screen.
Were you sorry when it ended?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the yes part of it, we had done it for 11 years, and we ran out of storylines and everything else, and it was the most wonderful group that I had ever worked with. As a matter of fact, this past Sunday, Alan Alda was in town, and he gathered all of us that are still around, that live in California and that are still alive, to go out and have a lunch with them in the afternoon. I mean, that's how close we still are. We are always in touch with one another. It was a remarkable group of actors who, to this day, we're still extremely, extremely close. And that part of it I miss. But then again, when you're in this business, you go, okay, where's my next stop in my career? Gee, I'm on this iconic show. I wonder, can I grab another brass ring or the gold ring on the merry-go-round? Where am I going to go from here? So that was exciting, the unknown factor of what was going to happen in your life.
Let the audience know what did happen in your life. What happened after MASH?
Well, one of the things that you're always leery of is when you leave a hit television show and you have a character that's so iconic, or characters that you played. For example, we'll go all the way back to, let's say, Carol O'Connor, on All of the Family, Andy Griffith and Mayberry, and using even, Alan Alda as Hawkeye, in MASH, myself, a guy who wears a dress on a show. Will the audience accept you in other things? And so that's the really frightening part of the unknown factor. And I was so very fortunate because of all the characters on there. I probably had the worst. Look what happened to Bob Denver. He did Gilligan's Island. The poor soul could never get a job after that. You get typecast or you get stuck with something. I got very lucky. I wound up doing movies of the week. I wound up in the Cannonball Run series with Burt Reynolds in that, playing the Crazed Sheik. I did guest stars. I was all over the game show and talk show network. I did so many movies for television, particularly for Aaron Spelling and a few other people. So I had a wonderful career. I was really quite pleased with the outcome of what happened to me afterwards. And actually, I'm still up for things. I just recently did a show for the pilot for the Fox network called The Cool Kids. And it's about senior citizens. I don't lie to anybody. I turned 83 years old, and I'm still very active. And I have a guest starring role in that. And I was just up for another pilot, and I'm still waiting to hear about it, that Norman Lear, who's 95 years old, is writing and producing. So I'm still quite active and still in the running for things. So I'm quite amazed at my longevity.
Glad to hear. I'm glad to hear that, and I think you deserve your success.
I did so many theater things too, Mike. I was all over the country with road companies. As I said, I was on Broadway with Guys and Dolls. I went back to off Broadway for a show called Flamingo Court with Anita Gillette. I've been there's so many. I did Tuesdays with Maury. I did the one-man George Burns show. Say goodnight, Gracie. I did so many other theater things, and I kept busy. I was very, very active, and I was pleased that I did that, and I was pleased that audiences still were coming to see me.
One last question. We talked just before we got on the air, but you met my namesake, Mike Connors, at one point.
Yes, I tell you, that was when I was with Red Skelton. Mike was he was a basketball player, I believe, at UCLA, and his real name was Ohanian. He's Armenian,
right.
And Michael Ohanian, and at that time he was known as Touch Connors. I don't know how he got the name Touch. Maybe it was because of his skill, shooting shots on the basketball court. And he was doing a TV show series called Tightrope. And he used to come on the set to visit with Red, and that's where I met him. And then later, we became very, very dear friends. This is even before Mannix, and then after Mannix. He and his wife, Mary Lou, were dear, dear friends. We did a love boat together that actually we went to Israel, Egypt, Turkey, and he was the villain in the piece, and I was a Turkish inspector, Inspector Sardu, and I had a big handlebar mustache. I worked for Interpol, and he was a diamond thief, and we actually shot at top copy. And the other friend of his, David Hedison, who I had done The Greatest Story Ever Told. That's another movie I had done, which was a biblical film with Max von Sydow and Donald Pleasance, and a great cast of people. I was on that movie for 9 months. Robert Blake was my roommate on that picture. Bob was also my roommate on another movie we had done with Charlton Heston. It's called Three Violent People with Chuck Heston and Gilbert Rowland and
you just brought that back into my memory. Yeah, that was a very interesting film. Ann Baxter and
Tom Tryon.
Tom Tryon,
first name, Ann Baxter. Yeah, and so I had done a lot of those pictures. But David, his real last name is Hadishian. He's also Armenian, and Mike and David were dear, dear friends. And David was also on that cruise that we took. It was a 2-hour love boat. You'll probably be able to see it on MeTV. They rerun it on that. It was very exciting for all of us to be on a private ship, and then to be in all these historical places. We were in Jerusalem and Bethlehem and then in Cairo, and they were so pleasant to work with. Eva Marie Saint was there, Shirley Jones, Harvey Korman, beside the cast, that the regulars that were on that show. Aaron Spelling was a wonderful, wonderful producer and a wonderful man to work for.
When those guys were in Turkey, did they have any comments or whatever about the Armenian Holocaust in the First World War?
No, we jokingly, we were in various places. I'm Lebanese.
I know that, yeah.
So jokingly, when we were in Israel, they were going to change my name to Chaim, instead of Jamie. And of course, Harvey Korman, is Jewish. So when we got to Egypt, we were going to call Harvey Abdullah. And then when we were in Turkey, we were going to call David and Mike Mohammed or something. Yeah, no, we had a great time. They were all very, very nice to all of us in the thing. We had a great time together. As I said, Aaron was a terrific producer, and I did a couple of movies of the week with him. One of them was a fun one called Murder Can Hurt You. It was a takeoff on all the TV detectives, and John Biner and I did the takeoff on Starsky and Hutch. And we were I was Stutsky and he was Hatch, and Gavin MacLeod was No Jack instead of Kojak. It was a lot of fun. Connie Stevens was Sergeant Salt instead of Sergeant Pepper from Policewoman. We did. Victor Buono instead of Ironside, he was Iron Bottom. His silliest thing, but it was a lot of fun.
One last question. What's next for Jamie Farr?
Well, right now I was hoping that I'd catch on in one of these series that would be the male counterpart to the Golden Girls. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm not interested in doing too much live theater now. It's a lot of hard work, and you got to be on the road, and I like to stay at home and go in and have a few pages of dialogue and a nice welcome series, and come home every night. And I'm still hoping that will happen.
Well, listen, thank you for sharing your memories with us on Connor's Corner.
Oh, listen, when you talk about it, that's all we have. Yeah, if we didn't talk about the past, we wouldn't be able to be here in the future. Right.
So thanks for being on our show. Hope, if you're ever in the New York area, let us know.
Okay, I was stationed there for a while. I told Chris, your producer there, I was at the Army Pictorial Center. That was the old Paramount Studios in Astoria. I think that's Kaufman Studios.
Yeah, Kaufman Studios now. Yeah.
And I think I used to pull KP in the commissary there when I was serving there. So yeah, I've been to New York many, many times, and I still love. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're in the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn. A lot of Lebanese families are still here.
Yeah, I have my relatives were there. They lived on Shore Road. They were in the linen business.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And when I was stationed there, I used to visit them quite often. My grandmother was a Jabara, and that was the Jabara family that lived there. And of course, they've got that Sahadi's, I think, Lebanese deli. That's
right.
And my one cousin, James Jabara, was America's first jet air ace. He shot down 16 MiGs in the Korean War, and they named an airport from his hometown in Wichita, Kansas. So my grandmother was a Jabara.
Okay.
And that's who I used to visit all the time. As a matter of fact, the gentleman that landed the airplane in your New York harbor there, he won the Jabara Award from the Air Force Academy for his heroic deed that he did.
You learn something every day. But if you come here, we'll get you a good Lebanese restaurant.
Okay. There isn't a bad one yet, I don't think.
No. But there are some good ones around here.
Okay. Well, Mike, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Jamie, thank you
for taking the time and for at least remembering.
Yes. Well,
remembering me.
Every time I see you on MeTV, one of those commercials, I get a kick out of it.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. I hear a lot of comments about that. Thank you very much, and continued success to you.